This video was made possible by these Patreon supporters.
Welcome back to my After Effects tutorial series. Last episode we learned about compositions, the graph editor, and effects. Now we are going to learn about some real-world compositing. After Effects was designed for this in mind, so get excited. Before we do that, however, I have to ask if anyone was able to figure out what I did to make the animation a little bit better. For one, I added motion blur, which of course is only a preference, but motion blur in moderation can make things look nice. I also made it so that the circle only rotates while it is moving. I did this by using the graph editor and changing the velocity of our rotation in our circle to be the same velocity of the lateral motion of the circle. Just a couple of tweaks, but ones that should be simple enough to understand, having learned about it in the last episode. So, moving on to our lesson for today, we are working in the real world. Once you've learned this, you will be able to understand the basics of putting anything into the real world and making it look like it belongs there. This has a couple of different steps, however. We are going to need to learn about blend modes, point tracking, planar tracking, and 3D camera tracking, as well as understand the 3D space within After Effects. This first episode about tracking will be all about blend modes and point tracking. Now you might notice when you place an asset into the world that it doesn't look like it belongs there. The colors are all wrong. They might be too bright or too dull. Maybe your object is supposed to look like it is see-through, but lowering the opacity doesn't make it look like you want it to. Blend modes are a neat function of both After Effects and most image editing software as well. Each blend mode takes a color and uses the color below it to affect the original color. What that means for you is that if you want to have something appear see-through without lowering the opacity of an object, or you have something appear as though it was being affected by the colors of the object below it, you want to change the blend mode. To do that is easy. You just click on the object in the timeline and you select the option that says normal and change it to what you want it to be. If you don't see this screen when looking at your assets, click this toggle button down here to change over to the correct screen. Now, it is hard for you to understand the effects of a blend mode without something below our object, so I am going to import some footage that I shot a few minutes ago. Putting this below our animation and setting our animation to an add blend mode lets you get a feel for how a blend mode can affect an image. There are a lot of these blend modes, and the easiest way for you to know what they do is to flip through each one and get a feel for them. If you'd like, there are resources on the internet that go more in depth into the science behind what a blend mode is doing and how it is doing it, but in this case it will be easier to understand what it is doing and not how. An add blend mode, as well as a screen blend mode, might be what you are looking for, unless you want an object to look like it has been written on, in which case you might want to use darken or multiply instead. This of course is an artistic choice, so I can't tell you what the best option is because there isn't one for every situation. Now, I haven't mentioned what we are actually doing yet because I didn't want you to feel like what we are doing is super complicated. Today, just focus on the lesson itself and learning the techniques, and after you will be able to see the results of those techniques. So blend modes help blend an object into a real-world scene. Something else that makes things look like they belong are lighting and color, which we may go over at another time. But the biggest kicker for getting something to look like it belongs in a real-world environment is tracking. Tracking is a method of keeping track of something in a scene so that the movement of the objects in the scene can be translated. Now, that might sound a bit complicated, but it's actually really easy, and it will become easier to understand once we actually implement it. Like before, I mentioned there are different methods of tracking, and each one is useful in a certain scenario. The one we are using today is called point tracking, both the simplest and one of the least simple tracking methods. So let's say we want to keep track of the quarter on my desk. To do that, we can import our live action footage into our composition, then click on the footage asset. You will notice that on the right side of the screen there's a tracker box. This is the point tracker. Each button is pretty self-explanatory, except maybe warp stabilizer, but what we want to do is track motion. So we will click track motion and it will bring up this white box on the screen. This white box has two bits to it. The inner box is everything that you are tracking from frame to frame. The outer box is where the computer will look for the inner box contents every frame. It is important to keep this outer box at an appropriate size when you are tracking. Small motions mean that the outer box should be smaller, and you can change the size of the box during tracking if the motion increases in speed. You can technically make the box the size of the whole screen if you like, but this would make each frame take very long time to search, and the tracker might find something else it thinks is the object that you are tracking. In layman's terms, the point tracker is looking for a similarly colored set of pixels, so it is best to have contrasting colors when tracking an object using the point tracker. So let us position our square over the quarter and then press this button to track forward one frame. The computer will find what it is looking for, then move forward one frame. To do this automatically, press this other forward button right next to the first one. If you want, you could also start from the end and track backwards as well. If you are ever tracking something and the tracker jumps way out of place, you can simply move the point back to where it belongs, or you can go back to that frame, increase or decrease that big outer square, and try tracking it again. Once we are finished, we can apply this tracking data to something. I am also going to introduce you to the concept of nulls. A null is an asset that can be manipulated like everything else, but has no visual to it. It is nothing, so to speak. What a null is often used for is for placing keyframe data, such as our track, onto itself without manipulating the original asset. This has the added bonus of being able to still freely move the original asset within the parameters of the track. If that makes no sense at all, I will show you what I mean. If we apply the track to our null, then parent the original asset to the null, the original object is now stuck to what the null is doing. However, if we also wanted it to look like it was moving left and right at the same time as being stuck to what the null is doing, we can move the object left and right within our original asset's position, while it again also follows the null's positions as well. So this was a lot of information in a very short time, and it is definitely a leap to understand compared to the last episode. So I suggest watching this video a few times and practicing tracking with the point tracker to get a hang of it. Once again, if you have any questions at all, I will be happy to answer them. I'd like to thank you for watching, comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you later, YouTube.